Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome from Athens. It's a pleasure to invite you all to our 22nd annual Marine Money Greek virtual conference. It is such a pity, of course, that Mia and I are not starting our conference in the ballroom of the Hilton Hotel in Athens, after more than 300 of us have enjoyed chatting and meeting over morning registration. But here we are at our virtual event, and we're very pleased that we have so many listening in, and of course, not only from Greece, but indeed from many parts of the world. I would like to thank our corporate and prime sponsors who have once again given us great support and who you will see on your screens throughout our virtual event, and to all of our speakers today for the time and effort taken to prepare. Greece as a country has handled the COVID-19 pandemic extremely well. The country came together, abided to a huge degree the correct and sensible guidance given by the Prime Minister and the Greek health experts, and we are in a better position than many other countries. That said, the colder weather is coming, and Marine Money would like to wish all of our friends, supporters and clients a good winter and health above all else. Greek shipping also continued its position of dominance in 2020, with companies handling crew issues as well as any, with new vessels and second-hand being acquired, and with investments being made. It is not exactly business as usual, but it is once more an excellent example of at least one industry where Greece excels and where Greece earns respect from all around the world. Before we start our first session, I'd like to tell you one or two ground rules. All guests listening in will be on mute during the session to ensure quality control. During the discussion, you can send in questions in the box shown now on your screen. These will come to me, and I will ask some of these questions at the end of the session on your behalf. To collapse the window in order to see the whole screen, just use the arrow at the top. With that, I would like to proceed to our opening session, which is an interview with Ioannis Alafouzos, indeed a captain of Greek Maritime. As I mentioned a moment ago, Greek shipping has continued to excel, and there is no better example of this than Mr. Alafouzos and the company he leads, Okeanis Eco Tankers. Recently listed on the Oslo Stock Exchange, all brand new scrubber-fitted vessels, and from the news this week, it looks like there are more to come. Interviewing today is George Paleokrassas, partner and co-head of Global Maritime with Watson, Farley and Williams. I hope you all enjoy our interview and our sessions today. George, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Gianni. It's a real pleasure to have you on, and thank you, Kevin and Mia, for inviting us to undertake this session. I think that, I think Kevin gave a very good introduction there. This is the slot allocated to captains of Greek Maritime, and you have a very long history. You and your family have a very long history in the maritime sector in Greece. And Kevin also made reference to your latest venture, Okeanis Eco Tankers. And I think we will concentrate mainly on that in the interview today. And it's interesting, reading over time about what you've been doing, and the focus of that venture seems to be in line with something that for years you've been a proponent of, which is environmental issues, green issues, and I think the focus of the venture seems to be on sustainable shipping, which is a real, very topical issue, something we hear about all the time. Therefore, I just wanted, you've been a very big proponent of the 2020 regulations and the environmental regulations within shipping. I just wanted, you to give sort of a background as to the history and how this venture came into being.
Well, okay, thank you very much for your question, George. We have been following the developments in tankers for many decades now, and we have seen that whenever there is the technological changes and changes that are imposed by the IMO, ships have to adjust, and companies, in order, in our opinion, to flourish, have to make sure that they follow the new rules and regulations. What is happening now with IMO 2020, where eco ships and scrubber-fitted ships have a huge advantage over older ships, happened also with the single and double hull tankers 20 years ago, when we had this changeover, and we saw exactly the same thing happening, where ships that were up to date technologically and environmentally had a very big advantage over other ships. Even with the scrubbers, even with a small spread between heavy sulfur fuel oil and low sulfur, very low sulfur fuel oil, today an eco scrubber-fitted VLCC has an advantage of $10,000 a day over a conventional older VLCC without scrubbers and non-eco. If you take into consideration the fact that modern ships in general are preferred by charterers vis-a-vis older ships, there's a huge difference now in earnings between the newest ships and the older vessels, and this ensures the survival in times like today, like what we have currently, or the prospering of companies when the market is more firm. At the same time, we have an aging fleet, and every year that goes by, you have more and more ships reaching the 15th or even 20th anniversary, which again gives a big advantage to more modern ships. Now, as far as the environment is concerned, of course, it's an oxymoron to say that a tanker can be a green ship, because at the end of the day, we burn tens of tons of fuel oil, whether it's very low sulfur or heavier fuel oil a day, and there is a significant carbon footprint for every vessel. However, all we can do is follow the regulations and let the IMO decide on what the next steps will be.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of when you say, I mean, it's clear that people have to follow the regulations, but one of the themes we've encountered in the past is to what extent shipping should be and is willing to actually be a driving force for changing regulations, because sometimes it's an industry which is viewed as being resistant to change. I mean, do you have a view on that as to whether that shipping should be the driving force in order to shape regulations?
Yeah, I guess that shipping, it's very difficult for shipping to take initiatives on its own. I think it's international fora that actually will take the initiatives and instruct us what to do. I think we're following the rules. There's very little else we can do than follow the rules. I cannot see how we could take, as a company, for instance, any initiative beyond having the ships that pollute the minimum that can impact in any way the environment. I think we're living through a period where we will see very significant changes, and I think this makes it even more important for shipping companies to follow the new developments, because there's a risk that if we don't do so, we will find ourselves outdated and out of the business. That's how I see things. But of course, we could say that slow speed steaming would have a very significant reduction in emissions, etc. But that's not something we can impose on the market.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And I mean, one of the points you raised initially also are technological changes and those developments and following those. I mean, where do you see that changing in the next few years? Do you see some significant technological changes and benefits out there which will reshape the industry and maybe this sector?
In my personal opinion is that we will have gradual changes and small improvements in technology as time passes, which will steadily reduce the emissions that ships have. I have not myself, I'm not at all certain that whether we will see LNG powered ships, for example, become a standard. In my opinion, we will probably see conventional, engines become more and more efficient as time passes, because the cost of installing a dual fuel propulsion system on a ship is very significant, and the benefits are relatively small. You still emit 50% of what you would be emitting if you were a conventional modern ship. At the same time, I have a big issue with LNG, because of course LNG is methane, and in the production of LNG, like also in the production of crude oil or anything related to in the greater sense to the oil industry, we have a significant methane slippage. Now methane is 30 times absorbs heat 30 times more than CO2, for example. So I don't think that methane is a solution. LNG is a solution. Potentially, it could be a medium-term solution, but as I said earlier, I anticipate that we'll probably have continuous developments in conventional diesel engines and ship designs that will need less and less power in order to be for propulsion. We are certainly at a crossroads, and inevitably oil will slowly become less important for the world economy. I think we have very clearly a trend that will continue and accelerate, where electricity will be produced by renewable sources. Already renewable sources, wind and solar, are just as competitive more or less as any other means of producing electricity, coal or brown coal or oil even. And I think we have to adapt, but I think that our industry will at some stage start becoming smaller. I think there will be I don't know whether we've reached peak oil yet. There's a lot of arguments whether we've reached peak oil now or whether it will be within the decade, but certainly by 2030 I think that we will certainly have reached peak oil. And that's another reason why companies have to adjust and have the most efficient ships, because as we will not have this what we've been used to over the years, where every year we had an increase in the need for transportation of crude oil, and I'm talking as a tanker company. So we have to become even more efficient and have even more efficient ships, so that as the number of ships becomes smaller that are needed for the transportation, the ships can still be efficient and give a decent return to the investment. So I think that inevitably we're in a new trend. I cannot see any technological changes that will lead to a cleaner form of propulsion in the immediate future. Probably things like hydrogen will be a very good solution, but still that's quite a bit far away. And I don't believe so much in LNG, simply because, as I said earlier, it's methane. And if you want to be very correct about it, the slippage that you have in the whole cycle of using and burning LNG, I don't think it's in any way better than burning fuel oil.
I mean, and on the back of that, I mean, when you listed your company, and as you've described it before, that you thought that the timing was right because of the upcoming regulatory changes, which you've described very clearly, and the disruption and uncertainty that those would create. Now, and you felt that that would be a factor in the order book being smaller, as well as you mentioned other factors as well. But given this uncertainty and given the adaptation that needs to be made, you, however, have had the confidence to order new ships at this sort of cusp where the regulations are taking effect and there's this uncertainty about the future. How have you felt confident to meet these challenges and to go ahead with the orders in cases where you anticipated, and it's proven correct, that the industry would probably take a step back from ordering?
Yeah, I guess we went. I think the writing was on the wall that new ships, eco ships, and scrubber-fitted ships would be much more efficient than the existing fleet, and we felt very confident about that a few years ago, and we chose to go to Oslo in Norway because there you have a very educated shipping community, and they could more easily understand where we were coming from. Having said this, and having described the benefits of very modern ships with scrubbers have today, this is not something new, nor is it something that some companies have been doing only today. We had the same thing. When I started my tanker career, we had CBT tankers, clean ballast tank equipped tankers, and which was a euphemism. It meant that you could you were using the same tanks for ballast and for oil, and that's why all our beaches, 30, 40 years ago, were full of tar. Now then, this changed and ships were obligated to have segregated ballast tanks, which was the first big step. And all the companies that ordered and had modern segregated ballast tank ships had a big advantage over the CBT ships because they were preferred by the oil majors. As you understand, as it is obvious, any pollution incident or anything relating with harming the environment is even more detrimental for an oil major than a shipping company. So rules and regulations vis-a-vis the environment are imposed by oil majors and oil traders, but also in the last 20 years very strictly by different governments where ships discharge, which gives a big advantage to modern ships, regardless of whether they were segregated ballast tank ships over clean ballast tank ships, or later, after the Exxon Valdez, whether they were double-hulled ships over segregated ballast tank ships. Every time we have a change, the ships that the companies that follow these changes have a big advantage, especially in a weaker market, where a charter has the ability to choose between a younger or an older vessel. The choice is very simple. So in addition, for the modern ship being much more efficient, and as I explained earlier today, an eco scrubber VLCC will burn $10,000 a day less than, let's say, a 10-year-old ship. The modern ships, the younger ships, also preferred by the charterers. And in a weak market in tankers, we have periods where a ship is waiting between cargoes, and this time is minimized in very modern ships. Whilst as ships get older, they have to wait for more and more and more time. So that's what gave us confidence to do this, and I think we feel quite certain that we are doing okay.
And with the latest new buildings, to the extent you can make a statement or say something publicly, how did you decide on the, in terms of fuel consumption, what type, the type of fuel that the new buildings would burn?
Well, let's say that the design of today's VLCCs is slightly improved over, let's say, the VLCCs that were built even 3 years ago. And even though the design of the ships that we've been seeing in the market are slightly different, they burn 3 or 4 tons a day less than what ships that were built 2 or 3 years ago were burning. So you see a continuing improvement in the amount of fuel that you need for propulsion, and this, which also, of course, has a direct impact on the amount of emissions that the ship has. So again, today there's very few ships on order, so there is a window of opportunity for ordering ships, and ships are still improving.
And in terms of, I mean, another factor, a key factor when it comes to ordering is also finance.
Yeah.
Were you, I mean, in terms of finance, have you found that that's readily available to you? And in terms of, especially the availability of export financing as well?
We have not seen any. Of course, when the market is weaker, banks are always a little bit more reluctant to offer financing, which I think is a mistake, because usually they become very keen, and the banks become very keen and almost sometimes aggressive in offering financing when the market is very firm. But in fact, it's always more prudent to finance ships when they're at a lower price and the cycle when the market is weaker. We haven't seen any change in financing, although it has become a little bit more difficult. But again, here, modern ships, young ships, which are equipped with all the latest equipment, which will result in less emissions, again, are preferred by banks. And there's also a number of banks which have a very green angle in whether they will finance a ship or not. So for modern eco-friendly ships, the problem for financing is smaller than what it is for older ships today.
Yeah, we certainly see that as well, that there are more and more banks that are taking a real interest in people who support the green agenda, because their stakeholders, shareholders have a focus on that, and likewise, you clearly see that with the oil majors as well, who in many ways are trying to rebrand themselves and almost want to make the word oil disappear from the branding of their companies.
Yeah.
But I mean, the impression I've had is that you are actually, leaving aside the business angle, where you've clearly made the argument and given the rationale for doing this from a business perspective, but you seem to be someone who's also a real believer and proponent in these issues, and it's not something, just the latest fashion that you're following.
No, we have to take care of the environment, and we have huge dangers that are becoming more and more apparent every day because of especially the overheating of the planet. Yeah, we have, we have also media involvement, and let's say we started with our media. We have been encouraging and we have been organizing extensive planting of trees in Greece. I don't know how to describe better than that. I think we've planted more than 4 million trees since, I guess, the early 90s. And every year during the winter, we have an extensive program of reforestation, where we, together with the authorities, we choose certain areas in Greece, and we try to organize the local communities, and we offer all the assistance that we can in order to reforest a certain mountain that has been burned down a couple of years ago, or something like this. I think the environment, we have to take care of the environment clearly, and we have every one of us has to try and do what we can in this respect. But we cannot ignore at the same time reality. We still need oil, we still need gasoline and diesel, and for transportation and for plastics and for many other reasons. And even though the world will change progressively, it will be a slow change. So in addition to us, let's say, emitting less carbon dioxide from our ships, etc., everybody has to take active measures in trying to improve the environment in whatever way we can.
You mentioned the media interests in what you said now, which is unusual in the context. I mean, you're not unique, but it's most Greek ship owners actually want to shy away from any publicity. To shy away from any publicity, and also don't want, local interests.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, shipping is a very international business, and there's very little connection between shipping and, let's say, there's very few connections in reality, except for that our offices are here, that we use Greek offices and etc. The connections between shipping and Greece and Greek laws and regulations are very small, are very limited. I think that shipping gave us an advantage in investing in media, that it made us financially independent. So we could have a more independent stance with our media. It was a choice. I think other people invest in land, in Greece, other people have other businesses in Greece. Some ship owners don't do anything in Greece except for live here. George, I cannot hear you now. I don't know whether you can still hear me. You can nod if you can, but I cannot hear you. No. Kevin?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you, Ioannis.
Yeah.
George, you have to put your microphone on. Your microphone. Okay. Now you're on.
Yeah. So even though a lot of ship owners have not chosen to be in media, at the end of the day, media is a very small industry in Greece. So how many ship owners could participate in media? There's many more ship owners than media outlets in Greece. But yeah, it just gives us independence and a different angle, and yeah, we're okay.
George, we can hear you. Go ahead, please. Yanni, let me ask you a question while George has some difficulty. I mean, you chose to go to Oslo. Why Oslo? You said there was an educated shipping community, but obviously it hasn't been the favored place for a lot of other shipping companies, Greek shipping companies anyway. Why Oslo?
I can hear, but it is the line. The line was cutting out, so I didn't really hear.
Yeah, but we can hear you now. We can hear you, so go ahead. Yanni, maybe you could just answer my question.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so Oslo there were two big, let's say, first of all, it was Norwegian banks that approached us when they saw us ordering eco ships with scrubbers, and they told us that, you know, in Norway we have a big interest in this. Secondly, as I said before, there's no comparison with the depth of knowledge in shipping and energy for Norwegians, for the Norwegian market, than any other market, including New York. And thirdly, we are a small company, especially by New York standards, whilst we are a medium-sized company by Norwegian standards. So we had a more significant presence. We've been having a more significant presence in Oslo than being one of the smallest companies in the American stock exchanges, where there are huge companies and very liquid companies that have also a different approach to the business compared to us. One of the features, one of our philosophy in our business is we have effectively, even though we become a publicly quoted company, we follow very much the basic principles of our business when, as a private company. We see ourselves, we are investors. My family controls like 58% of the company, and we feel that the best way of running the company is maximizing our dividends and selling ships opportunistically, whilst the element of playing or whatever with our share plays a much smaller part in our philosophy. I'm not suggesting that companies that are more active in their strategy towards the shares is inferior in any way, but we are doing what we know to do best, which is to run a company like a private company. And we hope that through, as I said, a very aggressive dividend policy, we'll be able to satisfy our shareholders.
Okay. I can now hear you clearly again. So I was able to catch that. And that's quite, I mean, that's quite an interesting philosophy, because it's not necessarily one that we see in other public companies where the focus seems to be exclusively on growth, whereas in your case you're making a statement as from the beginning that well, the size of the company will vary, and we'll look to make a return on the investment and return the investment to the investors at an opportune moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's one way of doing it, I guess. There's out there. Yeah.
I mean, one other thing, because you mentioned in terms of the extent of your family's involvement within the company and the stake that you have. I mean, one key issue which is becoming more and more relevant within the Greek shipping market, and it has always been, but it's something that there's a greater focus on now, is the issue of succession. And you know, to be frank, it's while Greek shipping is a huge success story, the issue of succession within Greek shipping is nowhere near, you know, can't be stated to be successful in most cases. I mean, in your case, you are someone who succeeded your father, and you're clearly grooming and preparing your son Aristides as someone who will form part of the next generation. I mean, were there any things that you felt that you know, that you felt that helped in the transition from your father to you, that you were trying to implement with your son, or are you trying to do something different?
Well, I was the member of the family who was interested in tankers, And I was running my own business and working also with my father at the same time, not continuously, but at some period of my life. So I think that I guess I played a bigger part in the creation of our current business, and I guess that my son Aristides, who is working in shipping, was following this this process, and we went. I guess if we were a mature company with a lot of ships and huge reserves, and maybe the incentive to work would be smaller, and maybe would be interested in doing different things. But I think I still want to develop a profitable business. I'm very interested in still developing a business, and so is my son. Well, maybe my son's children, if he is very successful, maybe philosophically they will choose to work less in shipping. Maybe shipping will be not such a good business at the time. I don't know. So I guess in that sense, I'm lucky.
Well, I think it's probably more less to do with luck and probably more to do with values and confidence that one can instill in one's children while they grow up. Of course, people have different interests, so that they may not be interested in the family business. But I think I think one of the elements clearly, and this is where I think the failure, the bad examples are, is preparing people and giving them the confidence, but the preparation at the same time in order to be accepted, and then allowing them to have a go while also preparing the organization itself to accept that transition. I think those are very key features in this.
Yeah, I agree.
Kevin, I see you're on, which probably means that you've got a whole list.
I've just popped up, yeah.
From,
Perhaps I could ask a couple of questions came in from the audience, and I'd just like to ask Ioannis those questions. You said early on in the discussion that you do not feel overly positive of LNG as a fuel, perhaps shorter term or medium term, but not longer term. But there are clearly others in the industry who are pushing hard in that direction. Do you believe that maybe a few years out, there may be some sort of split disagreement in the industry? It's nothing new, of course, it happens all the time. But I mean, in terms of what happens next and where do we go?
Both arguments, whether you use a conventional engine that burns less and less fuel, or whether you use an engine that can also burn LNG, makes sense. I don't. So it's also a matter of luck what will happen in the end. But personally, having spoken with shipyards and especially shipyards I respect, it is my opinion that the chances are that we will see diesel engines becoming more and more efficient, and I think this will be a bridge to the next fuel. And maybe I'm totally wrong, maybe because I'm not in the LNG business, because I know less about LNG, I'm not at all confident that the additional cost that you need to build a ship with fuel propulsion is something that an owner will recuperate. I don't think that the additional cost, it's too expensive. I think that the LNG propulsion is too expensive for the time being. But then again, I might be wrong. I've been wrong many times in the past.
Okay, Ioannis, thank you. One more question that came in from the audience about the Poseidon principles. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of what they are. Certain banks are now, they have certain requirements in terms of ESG and other aspects, and they take that seriously into account when they're giving financing. Just your thoughts on that. I mean, are you favourable towards that direction, and do you think it can apply across the entire industry?
I think so. As I said earlier, this was happening over the years. I think when I started my career in shipping in the early 80s, I'm afraid, it was quite common to see old ships being refinanced by first-class banks and small ships being refinanced by first-class banks, etc. But as the years passed, you could see banks going more towards the relatively bigger owners and also the more modern ships, especially as technology started accelerating and ships were continuously changing. So I think that the green element in ship finance today, even though it's there, and I think it will become more and more important as time passes, it's a development of the trend that we've been seeing, that banks prefer to finance more organized companies who have more modern ships. It's just a continuing trend. And we've seen a lot of banks exiting shipping because they had a lot of losses, especially with, again, with, middle-aged ships or, yeah. So I think there's more structure in financing today, and I think one very important element is the environment.
Thank you, Yanni. George, I mean, maybe I could just give 1 minute to you on the Poseidon principles as well, because I mean, WFW were involved in the establishment of those principles. I mean, did you see that more and more in finance coming into the Greek market and all markets for that matter?
Yeah, I think. Well, yes, you are right. We were the firm together with the initial banks on, let's say, the committee which drafted the principles or helped in formulating the principles, and that's now moved into loan documentation, and we see that all the signatories to that committee have imposed that requirement on their loans. I mean, principally, so far it's mostly European banks, Western banks, rather than Asian banks, but it is something that's made its way and become a feature now of financing, and it is something that it is slowly being accepted within the industry. Slowly is probably an incorrect word, but gradually being accepted within the industry itself. But I think that the Poseidon Principles is only a first step, because we are going to see, I think, a much bigger focus from banks on ESG principles. So this is just a very, very first step, and there will be an increased scrutiny and requirement from financiers for ESG compliance within the shipping industry.
Thank you, George.
If I may add something on this, George, even though European banks state their intention to finance environmentally friendly ships more easily, most Asian banks and financiers have really done the same thing through financing primarily new ships.
Yeah.
I guess. So it's a similar result with two different approaches.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Yanni. Just a final question, Yanni, and just if you can answer in 1 or 2 minutes. It's more of a general question, not really shipping related. Are you confident about Greece as a country over the next few years? I mean, they've done a great job in handling COVID compared to most other places. The economy was going in the right direction prior to the beginning of this year. What about Greece as a country?
Well, of course, I'm confident. I'm Greek after all, but I think we have a good chance to do better Greece has a habit of coming back from disasters. We've had many over our modern history, 200 odd years, and we've had 6 or 7 bankruptcies and or disasters or military disasters, and every time we've bounced back and we've been better than before. So yes, I am confident.
That's great. Okay, Ioannis and George, thank you very much for our first session at our Marine Money 2020 Virtual Forum. For all of you listening in, this session has been recorded and will be posted within the next day or two, and you can all listen to it again. Once again, thank you very much. Our next session is in 30 minutes at half an hour, and it's titled Fresh Capital in Greek Shipping. Looking forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.